Look how much movement there is on the sprocket without the shaft moving. But we're not big fans of that 2mm low tension ring. Oiler jet is loose. That's a problem.
Problem with taking crank compression on this engine, it's got 2 spark plugs per cylinder.
Right.
So you take the plugs out on this side, disconnect the spark plug wires. When you go to crank it, it's still going to try to start, even with the compression gauge in it. So you have to come over here, disconnect the primary connector to the coil, and this will stop it from sparking.
Okay.
So that way it doesn't try to start while you're taking the compression test. To do an accurate compression test, we're going to have to disconnect the ACRs because the Harley module, there's no way to turn those off. They will always function, so you'll not get a correct reading on your compression gauge. 230 pounds.
So the point of what we're doing here is we're baselining the motorcycle. Right. We want to make sure that the engine is broken in properly, that it's operating properly, that you don't have issues with your cylinder heads or that your bottom end is wet sumping. So what we've done so far is we've run it on the dyno. It's put down a very, very good number. He just did the cranking compression test. We saw 235 in each hole. That's fantastic. It's exactly where this motor should be in a broken instant. And what he's about to do is a leak down test to make sure that the valves are sealing and there's nothing unusual with your ring pack. We're going to drain the oil that's in your bottom end and measure it so we can tell if it's wet sumping or not. We already know by the numbers it's not wet sumping, but we want to know how much is in there because that is kind of a common problem.
Okay.
So we just want to make sure everything is in good shape before we really tear into this, because if you have a problem now, it's going to carry through and it's only going to compound. So if something is not right, we need to know right now.
So this is why we took the crank positioning sensor out in the first place. This is going to go in its place, which is going to lock the crankshaft. Make sure that both pistons are on top dead center, all the way at the top. And you put this in there, and this will lock the crankshaft. And then when we put air pressure to the cylinder, it won't try to rotate it. And then we can see if anything's leaking and measure how much it's leaking. So they put this safety tag on it to let you know that it's in there. Definitely don't want to hit the starter while that's in there because it will not turn. Basically doing a leak down test, 100 PSI. This one looks to be somewhere around 12%, 12.5%, maybe 13%. Which is right in range of what I've seen them come in here. See right there, it's almost 10. With only about 10,000 miles on it, that seems to be normal. As they get more mileage on them, they will seal up better. The leak, obviously, at that point, the leakage will go down. So what ends up happening is the piston rings are leaking slightly. So if you were to continue riding this bike, I think it has 9,000 miles, come back in another 10,000, this would probably be less, as the rings seated in more. So, important things with this is that the front and rear are identical almost, within 0.5%. So the compression matches are daggone close, 235, and a little over 230, and the leak down is about 11.5 to 12.5% for both cylinders. So we got to go.
Good. Awesome.
Well, now that everything passes, the baseline, compression, the leak down, now we're going to begin taking it apart.
All right.
The first thing we're going to do is take off the exhaust, the intake, push rods, rocker arms, cylinder heads, and then ultimately the cam chest is going to come apart.
So are we getting a new throttle body or?
No, we're going to keep this throttle body and intake manifold, but we are going to upgrade the fuel injectors to 5.5 Harley-Davidson injector,
Okay.
which is our next step up.
But right here, see if I can scrape it up. You see that? See that's breaking off there?
Uh-huh.
So some of that is oil deposits, where that's oil that burns. See how it's white there?
Uh-huh.
That's oil there. That's not carbon. Carbon would be a natural buildup that would be from the combustion process. The Harley cylinders use a 2 millimeter low tension oil ring, and they tend to not seal up and keep the oil controlled. And so when you see a deposit that's an oil deposit that's caked or burned the way that is, that's because the ring's not wiping it off the cylinder. When your sleeper kit we're going to do is going to have a wider oil ring, and it's going to have a standard tension, not low tension, because we want to clean that cylinder wall clean. We don't want to have a situation where we have oil deposits that are burning. They're burning correctly. They're burning dry, so it means you got good combustion. But see how they're just flaking off there? Yeah. See how they're just rolling around as I'm just kind of moving them off? And that's oil deposits. So we'll that'll be an improvement with your package.
The carbon and everything on the
You
top.
don't want them to fall in.
Yeah, and get into the engine and the crankcase, so
Oh, okay.
rags will catch it.
I got it.
Yeah, it's close.
So there's your cylinder.
Uh-huh.
That's a 3.937 bore. Okay. So you have a 107 with a 4 3/8 stroke. And then over here, if you bring your camera in, we'll hone in. That's that little narrow 2 millimeter oil ring. So there's your top compression
Get this
ring.
out of the way.
There's your second ring. I'm going to rotate that around just a little bit so we can, that's the gap, let go of that. Yeah, okay. So there's the second ring. But that right there where my pointer is, that's where that little 2 millimeter low tension ring is. And it's the cause of a fair amount of what I would call, it's like, it's not that it's a problem, but it's not tightly sealed up for oil consumption. So you sometimes in your long trips you might add some oil between changes.
Right.
And what we're trying to do is get to a point where it just doesn't use any between changes.
Perfect.
Because we want to clean it up how it seals up in the engine.
So, here you go. You want to.
The piston comes off. There's those deposits that we were talking about before. Not bad, but you can see where we've already knocked some of them loose just by taking my scribe there and just my rule and just moving around.
It's kind of wild to put the rags in, so that way that doesn't go down into the crankcase.
Oh, okay.
Then you got to flush the crankcase out.
Now he's going to take the next one off.
Okay. Here's the other fence.
Yep.
You can see all the carbon. That's what we put the rags under for, because that could fall into the crankcase.
Some of it's carbon, some of it is actually dry oil deposits.
Right.
Okay.
They kind of live in the same environment together. Good. This is a dry coating that Harley puts on the piston, but we're not big fans of that 2 millimeter low tension ring. It's just it's hard to get her to seal up with that's in place. So we've got a little bit of carbon, which is natural, and we have some oil deposits that we've seen, and that's because the ring pack, the way it was sealing up. So take a look in here, bring your camera in here, and you'll see it on the intake there. You see it down there where it's, see those little speckles in there?
Yeah.
And that's the oil that was past the ring. It's in the combustion chamber, it burns here, and during the overlap process, it can end up in the intake. And the exhaust, it looks more like dried deposits. What we're going to do is we're going to take these apart, and we're going to do a soda blast, which does not impinge or affect anything that's in the heads, just so we can get any deposits off the valves, out of the guide bores, out of the ports, so when it goes back on, it's just fresh like it was when it was new. Okay. definitely had an oil control issue on the rings. So we have some more deposits than we would prefer to see.
Oh my. I don't know.
So-
Need a better light. I can see that.
Can you see that?
Yeah, oh yeah.
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 So I'm thinking what we're going to do is we're going to take springs apart, soda blast, and see what the situation looks like here. So that way when we put the cylinder kit and the 472 in, we know that this package is good to go. This quadrant or this station is cylinder heads. So he's got a flow bench, which you can see on the back side there, seat cutting machines. So come on over this side, sir.
Okay.
So with the cylinder heads off and cylinders off, obviously, and everything's moving along, there's a couple things that Bob wants to do in this process that you'd want somebody to install a sleeper kit on. One is once you get your timing chest apart, you want to know how much crankshaft run out you got on the tip of the pinion shaft. It's a gauge point we want to know. So we're going to do that when we go back over to the other side. But when you're doing cylinder kits, anytime anybody's installing a cylinder kit on an M8, there's a inherent problem that showed up on a variety of percentage of motorcycles that have been built production. Now right here, you can see on your camera, that's a piston jet, or referred to as a piston oiler. And that squirts oil at a certain pressure up onto the cylinder and the piston to cool it. There's another one there for the rear cylinder. So they work independently. And on some M8 engines, we found those to where they're loose. They're not fully secured in the case, and they can be leaking on the backside. They're bleeding oil that should be squirting here because they're not, the hardware is not fully secured. So it's like having a leak. So Bob is going to install this wrench. They feel tight. I've taken moved them up and down, and I can't get that. But we know that these screws are self-threaders. So that may be part of the problem what's happening at the assembly process at the factory. Because when the tool hits the stop and says that you can't go any further, it may not be tight.
Okay, this one's loose. Look at that.
So look at there. So Bob's just checking that right now.
This is a Tourqe wrench.
And you've got it set at the proper torque for that screw.
Right. See it?
And there it goes. And that is.
So I'm
there's
going
a
to
little
put
bit
a
of
half a
movement.
turn on it.
So it's possible we could have had a little bit of bleeding on the back side of that.
And then we do the other one here. So that's rotation.
There we go.
The factory spec is 25 to 35 inch-pounds. And this is using a little snap-on torque instrument.
If you have where the oiler jet is loose, that's a problem. Probably should take the screws out and let's take a look at the system, because those things cannot be physically loose. But even if you can't feel that, it's a good idea to put your hardware up on there and just secure those bolts, because we want to make sure that all the oil is supposed to be squirting through there, because leaking jets on the back side can be a huge part of why M8 engines can oversump with oil. Good news about this engine, when we tested it earlier today, is it has very little oil on the bottom end, which is great. That means that it is probably, I doubt these were leaking, but what Bob's doing to secure that, good thing.
This one's the same amount loose, about 3/8 of a turn. There's torque on them, but just not enough. It's not spec. So it's about, there you go. Now all four of them are torque to spec. Now if they were loose, for example, like Dan was saying, if they're loose, if you could touch them and you could move them, then you would want to take those screws out,
Drastically.
relock, tight them, and put them back in again. But because they were already tight, just not to spec, we just torqued them to spec.
Okay, so Bob is going to rotate the crankshaft. You can see he's got a little indicator set up here, so he can just check to see how much run out's on the tip of the crank.
It should go to zero.
Stop there. Okay, go ahead. Nice and fluid. You got about, yeah, 1, 2, 3, maybe 3.5. That's pretty good.
Okay.
Pretty good. There's no sign here of any scarring. If you look on the shaft, you know, where there's a lack of oil, there's no, you know, everything looks pretty good. I'll just do a quick check here.
Yeah, just got yours popped off.
So here we are. This is the fitment of this sprocket. It drives the cam chain. Okay. And look how much movement there is on the sprocket without the shaft moving. It's quite a bit. So we're going to replace this gear with an aftermarket gear. It's going to have a much nicer fit, so that improves the process. Again, part of what we're trying to show here is the things you can do for inspection, for correction, for improvement, so that you end up with a better package.
It's tore all apart, and they're going to be putting it together. It's in good hands here at Zippers, but I'm going to go to the hotel tonight and lay down and come back in the morning and show you the rest of the build. All right, so see you then. We left the motorcycle shop. It's late. We're going to get somewhere, get something to eat and get back to the hotel. But we're going to go into Five Guys, burgers and fries, and get something to eat. All right. It's late. Let's see, this camera's focused. We're leaving Five Guys right over there. About to go back to the hotel. We are in, what was this place called again?
I think it's Hanover, I think.
What do you say?
Hanover.
We're in Hanover, Maryland. Oh, I gotta put my seatbelt on. He's driving with no lights on. That's what happens when you get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to be somewhere that's 8 hours away. So, all right, so let's get back to the hotel. I'll see you then. On our way back to Zippers. It is cold out here compared to yesterday.
Morning.
Nothing like having the camera in face first thing in the morning, huh?
So what he's doing here is checking the rod straightness. I'm not going to say this was bad from the start, but just over time, heat cycling, these things do move a slight amount. So what we're going to do is forcibly move it back to where we have it perfectly square to the deck surface so that your new pistons are running perfect inside the cylinder.